Imagine waking up tomorrow and finding out the biggest corporate crime of the decade was just erased, like completely deleted from reality. And not just hidden, but legally forbidden from even being mentioned. Well, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the mind-bending reality of an entirely parallel justice system that's designed to literally buy silence. We're going to break down the invisible architecture of censorship, look at how the ultra-rich manipulate the law to their advantage, and see exactly what happens when the internet absolutely refuses to stay quiet. Let's get into it.
So picture this. It's the morning of October 12, 2009. Editors at The Guardian newspaper are sitting on one of the most explosive stories in British journalism history. But there's a catch. They are totally trapped. They've been hit with a legal gag order so extreme, so restrictive, that they aren't even allowed to tell you they've been gagged. They couldn't explain the missing story, and they couldn't even confirm there were legal proceedings happening. So what were they actually hiding? Well, a massive multinational company called Trafigura had allegedly dumped toxic waste along the Ivory Coast, leaving thousands of people with severe chemical burns and respiratory failure. But instead of facing the music, Trafigura's elite lawyers simply bought a court order to legally silence the silence itself. Crazy, right?
But here is where that multi-million-dollar legal shield spectacularly backfired. A really frustrated Guardian journalist, completely boxed in by the courts, fired off a single, cryptic, 140-character tweet. No names, no specific accusations at all. Just a really subtle hint that the newspaper had been banned from reporting on a public parliamentary question. And honestly, that tiny digital spark was all the internet needed. Within hours, thousands of web sleuths dug up the hidden parliamentary record, and boom, Trafigura was trending globally. By the very next morning, the elite legal injunction was totally worthless and actually had to be withdrawn. It was the cinematic, total collapse of a massive corporate cover-up, unfolding live right before the world's eyes.
Which brings us to Section 1, How to Buy Invisibility and the Actual Architecture of Silence.
Okay, so how did democratic courts ever allow a corporation to literally buy a cover-up? The answer is a terrifying legal mechanism known as a super injunction. Think of this as a literal invisibility cloak for the ultra-rich. It's basically a silence wrapped inside another silence. It doesn't just kill the news story, it completely erases the fact that the trial is even happening. No public case number, no press reports, no judgment on the public record. From the outside looking in, the scandal simply never existed in the first place. It is the ultimate vanishing act for powerful people, leaving absolutely zero trace in the legal system.
Now, as you might guess, this kind of legal magic doesn't come cheap. Accessing this bespoke suppression from elite media law firms costs hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of pounds. And speed is absolutely everything here. If you have bottomless wealth, you can quite literally buy an emergency middle-of-the-night court order from an off-duty judge to make your problems vanish before the morning paper is even printed. This creates a deeply concerning asymmetry of power. I mean, this isn't justice. It's a VIP premium service exclusively for the wealthy, effectively building a two-tiered legal system where the truth is determined by the size of your bank account.
So how exactly did lawyers justify this in a free society? Well, they essentially found a legal hack. They weaponized the 1998 Human Rights Act. They took Article 8, which is the right to privacy, a law genuinely meant to protect vulnerable abuse survivors or endangered witnesses, and they pitted it against Article 10, the freedom of expression. These clever, highly paid lawyers took legitimate protections and twisted human rights law into a preemptive strike for billionaires to just censor the press. It was a beautifully elegant yet incredibly dangerous form of censorship that turned the very laws meant to protect citizens into weapons against them.
Moving on to Section 2, the internet fights back and when silence failed. Let's jump ahead to 2011, when the secretive system met an absolute breaking point. In the spring of 2011, this billionaire shield met its match in the wildest way possible. A famous footballer named Ryan Giggs had bought a super injunction to hide an alleged affair, but there was a massive problem. The entire internet was already gossiping about it. The tension finally snapped when Member of Parliament John Hemming used an ancient rule called parliamentary privilege to name Giggs directly in the House of Commons. Because of a centuries-old constitutional rule from the 1600s that says you literally cannot be sued for what you say in Parliament, the press could finally print his name. It took an archaic 17th-century legal loophole to finally break a modern billionaire's super injunction.
And this totally exposed the massive, glaring vulnerability in the elite's armor. An injunction is a national legal instrument enforced by local judges, right? But the internet doesn't have borders. The super injunction was essentially an analog weapon completely misfiring in a digital world. A story legally suppressed by a high court judge in London could be tweeted globally in seconds by some anonymous teenager in another country, totally bypassing the system. You just cannot put a national gag order on the World Wide Web, and the courts were entirely powerless to stop the digital floodgates from opening.
Which leads us into Section 3,
The new weapons of silence, NDAs and slaps. Because if you think the elites just packed up and gave up when Twitter beat their super injunctions, yeah, no. They just upgraded their arsenal.
As public courts became way too risky and hesitant to grant full invisibility cloaks, the architecture of silence just retreated into the shadows. It moved out of public courtrooms entirely, mutating into private, unregulated contracts and aggressively weaponized lawsuits. For every tool of suppression the public defeated, a darker, more sophisticated weapon was forged to take its place. The elite figured out that if they couldn't gag the press with a judge's signature, they could simply bankrupt the journalists or silence the victims directly behind closed doors.
Take the NDA, the non-disclosure agreement. Now, originally, these were just boring corporate contracts meant to protect trade secrets like software code or a recipe. But as the Me Too movement and the Harvey Weinstein scandal exposed to the world, NDAs had mutated. They became a dark, institutionalized cover-up mechanism. The new playbook was brutally simple. Pay off a vulnerable victim, bind them to permanent silence with a terrifying, financially crippling contract, and then just carry on the abuse as usual. No judges, no public records, just purchase silence that let institutional misconduct thrive entirely in the dark. And then there are slaps, strategic lawsuits against public participation. Just look at the number 47. That staggering number represents the chilling brutality of this tactic. 47 is exactly how many simultaneous, bank-breaking lawsuits the Maltese investigative journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia was fighting on the very day she was assassinated. These lawsuits aren't even designed to be won in a courtroom. They're designed to weaponize the legal process itself. The goal is to bury a journalist in so much debt, paperwork, and psychological torment that they simply collapse and abandon the story. It is quite literally a terrifying war of financial attrition.
Section 4. The cost of hidden truths. So, what is the ultimate price we all pay when the powerful can literally manufacture their own reality? Well, the real tragedy of this system isn't just the explosive scandals we find out about a decade too late. The true insidious legacy is what we call the chilling effect. Because fighting these legal weapons is so astronomically expensive, newsrooms become absolutely terrified. They self-censor. Editors will kill vital investigations before a single interview is even conducted. So the ultimate cost to society isn't the news that gets formally banned by a judge, it's the massive corporate frauds, the institutional abuses, and the political corruption that never gets written about at all. The silence just becomes the norm. As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to really think about the media you consume today. The super injunction, the NDA, the slap, these are the tools of a justice system built entirely on wealth, not truth. They create a world of curated, purchased absences. So look at the blank spaces in your daily newsfeed and ask yourself this. If the system works by legally erasing the evidence, what massive, global scandals are happening right now that the wealthy have already paid to make disappear?